Hello and welcome to the News9 Plus show on the world's first news and current affairs OTT platform, News9 Plus. India has a drone problem. Its military drones, to be more specific, have Chinese components in them. Now, India's Defense Ministry has just cancelled a large drone deal with a private Indian company. This 230 crore deal was meant to supply the army with 400 drones. These drones were meant to be used along the line of actual control with China. Why was the drone deal scrapped? It turns out that these drones had Chinese parts and electronics and were thus vulnerable to malicious Chinese code which could be used to hijack them. In fact, there have been several such instances where Indian drones had operational failures along the LOC and LAC. There are fears of data security, that the information gathered by these drones could be leaked to the adversary. Now, the basic issue is that India doesn't have a drone ecosystem that's sufficiently large to supply all its vendors with Indian-made components. What does India need to do to overcome this? Now, joining me to discuss this issue are Lieutenant General P. Ravi Shankar, Ankit Mehta, CEO, IdeaForge, and Group Captain Rajiv Naran. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Ankit, I want to start by asking you this. You're one of India's oldest drone manufacturers. Your company, IdeaForge, has been around for 2 decades? I understand that a drone is made up of many components, propellers, flight controllers, the central processing unit, which control the drone's flight using sensors. There's a battery, there are motors, cameras, ESCs, landing gear, all of that. It's a assembly of many parts. Tell us what percentage of all of these parts are made in India?
So I think when we look at the bill of materials, I think just at the bill of materials level, so typically we don't look at it at the bill of materials level. First of all, I think we look at it from the value perspective.
Right.
And from a value perspective, we are basically at least more than 60-70%, indigenous subsystem, producer. So because if you look at it, the way typically a drone will be built, right, is that you will buy subsystems which will be needed as raw materials for building the technology. Then you will build the technology, which is your in-house effort, and
Right.
then you will sell the product to the end customer. So when we look at indigenous contribution, we have to look at the contribution that has been made by the OEM themselves, as well as the contribution that is coming from the components that they might be buying from the rest of the ecosystem. So from that point of view, it is more relevant to track the overall percentage of indigenization. And within that, for us, at least our systems have always been ahead of most of the benchmarks that have been laid out by the Indian government.
Right, but there is a problem with cheap Chinese components finding their way into Indian military drones. I mean, how did that happen? Is it because of this L1 fixation, the fact that we want the cheapest drone company, we want to give the order to the cheapest company, and he therefore buys the cheapest components available on the global market? Is that the real problem?
So I think, L1 is not really in that one sense, the problem here, right? Because L1 is irrespective of whether the subsystems are being bought from India or anywhere. I think, so let us look at what we do as an OEM, right? We focus on this problem in terms of subsystems in 2-3 layers, right? One layer is the layer of critical subsystems that have the vulnerabilities, that have the potential to have the vulnerabilities that you mentioned at the beginning, right?
Right.
The second layer is the component of what do we need to do to ensure that we have strategic autonomy in our country. And the third layer is meeting the indigenous content requirements so that we ensure that all the dollars are, prevented from going out if we can avoid that, right? So I think if we look at these 3 vectors in a very graded manner, then all of the requirements and what needs to be done will emerge. The first thing we need to do is we need to ensure that none of the critical subsystems are coming from any geography of concern, right?
Right.
Which, for example, as an OEM for us is already true. And for many years, because we've been building this technology from grounds up for the last 20 years. So for us, none of the critical subsystems have anything emanating from geographies of concern that is part of the chain that is relevant for the kind of misuse it can lead to, right? So that is true for us for many, many years. When it comes to strategic autonomy, there may be some more subsystems which are required for strategic autonomy. If somebody were to prevent us from getting subsystems from somewhere,
Right.
then we probably can get into a fix and our supply chains can become vulnerable. We
Right.
should have many options, and those options should not be built off technology that can be prevented to be shared from us as a nation.
Right.
So that vector, we have again done tremendous amount of progress at IdeaForge at least to make sure that our motors going forward, our ESCs and many other vectors are indigenous, right? Or are being built in India. Now, we have to also understand that when something is going to be built in India, at what level is it going to be built, right? Beyond a point, are we saying that we can build everything in India at any point in time? No country has the capability globally now
Yes.
to build everything that is sourced locally from the mines of that country,
Right. So,
right?
but you use
Mines of
that
that country is
expression
fine.
of
Mines of that country is
yes.
not going to happen, right?
Absolutely. So that
So
geographies of
therefore,
concern is what we are trying to address, Ankit, and I'm going to ask General Ravi Shankar this question about this geographies of concern. General Ravi Shankar, China is one of the world's largest manufacturers of drone components. They're literally, years ahead of every other country in the world. How can we, insulate the system to ensure that no Chinese components infiltrate into our drone projects of the kind that Ankit was mentioning, that you ensure that the critical systems don't have Chinese components? How can we ensure that this doesn't happen?
Yeah, it's a very simple thing. All you have to do is lay down a policy that nothing from China can be into your critical system. As simple as that. We could do it in major systems where we said
Right.
no component from China can come in. And that's it. All the stock of 60%, 40% indigenous and all is I don't take it. Because I do know that in certain systems, the government has insisted that no Chinese parts and no Chinese parts for you.
But isn't that system already in play, General Shankar? The fact that you cannot import Chinese components, especially on your
there is.
military drones.
Yeah. Look, I'm not talking of drones. I'm not talking of a wider family of equipment.
Right.
And our systems, major systems which we built, the government has many times laid down these restrictions. Nothing from China can be brought. And nothing from China has been brought. And we built systems with that. So in this case, the government probably didn't lay down a stipulation like that. If they had laid down a stipulation like that, there wouldn't have been any Chinese parts, and all this thing wouldn't have happened also.
Right.
We wouldn't be in this problem. So it's a matter of the government laying down. Now, it's not enough to just lay down a policy and say you do what you want.
Right.
You have to enable that alternate system to flourish and develop here, which I think the government has not done it. I mean, I think it's very clear that they have not done it. You have to have what is it involved? You need to have your own semiconductors.
Right.
You need to have your own processors. You need to have your own software. Now, the next question is it feasible for us to do it? Yes, it is feasible. Right? Have we done it? No. Will we do it now? After this, I'm sure we'll do it because this will be a great lesson. This, DeepSeek, all this, if you see,
these are wake-up calls.
These are huge wake-up calls. This will give us that message. Look,
Right.
if you don't do it, you'll lose the next war with China. As simple as that.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
And you have to start doing it.
There are no runner-up. There is no runner-up in conflict. Yes.
No, I want to put across something else.
Yes.
Is the government aware of this? Government is aware of this. Is the government at least started to do something of it? Happily, yes. Today there is a move. I mean, I know for myself in IIT Madras that we are starting to look at establishing a fab for semiconductors.
Right.
We already produce some processors or designed and developed processors. We have an OS system in place. So maybe in the next 3 to 4 years, we should be out of this problem if the government funds the people who can design and develop all this, and then they come up to scale. So it needs a whole of government approach.
It
If
needs a
that is
whole of
not
government
there,
approach. Yes, absolutely.
yeah.
Group Captain Narang, I'm just reading this report from the Times of India, which actually talks about the deal for 400 drones being scrapped. I mean, it's a very large deal and it's hundreds of crores literally. How did this actually get through with Chinese components? Why was enough diligence not exercised when testing these drones?
So, Ankit mentioned about what his company is doing.
Yes.
So, he's telling you that not all companies are using Chinese
Yes, there
components.
is an alternative. Yes, there is an indigenous alternative
Alternative.
that's
So,
possible.
similarly, there are a lot of component manufacturers in India who are making indigenous components in India.
Right.
But the problem in such procurement is there is no policy which is being implemented in the sense where we demand certain indigenous drones and drone component to the component level.
Right.
So since it's not stipulated in the your contract,
Right.
those aspects do not get checked. The second part is Indian Army has started now having realized that this challenge, they have started developing a drone framework.
Right.
But the challenge which they are likely to face, what General Shankar said is that there is no mechanism.
Right.
How do you, who will identify indigenous content? Who will validate indigenous content? Who will certify indigenous content? Because you have to have a technical entity which is designated and which does this role. And the second part comes in the procurement. If
Right.
there are indigenous manufacturers, even if you go to a government e-marketplace, is there a mechanism of picking up drones which are different from the assembled drones? There's no differentiation being done for the
Right.
indigenous drones. So I think the people who are developing indigenous
Yes.
technology, they have to be given preference in the procurement.
Right.
And the next part comes is incentivization. India started with a policy on production linked incentive,
Yes.
but the policy did not differentiate what components were used. So I think no, we need to incentivize indigenous design. So I
Yes.
think some
I'm going to go to
of this-
Ankit very quickly before I wrap, Group Captain Narang. Ankit, tell us from a manufacturer's perspective what the government really needs to incentivize indigenization. Like you mentioned, you've been going that extra mile to ensure that your components are indigenous or from geographies that are not in dispute with us. What does the government really need to do now? This is a wake-up call, as General Shankar said, for us, and it was, a long in the making. This wake-up call about Chinese components in the drones. What does the government really need to do now to ensure that we don't have this a repeat of this kind of an instance?
I think there are two very simple initiatives. One is continuing on the initiative that we have done already, which is the PLI scheme, come up with a much larger scheme. And the scheme is very well drafted in the drones business because it allows and wants everyone who's building drones to build their own intellectual property and sort of gives them at least 8% of their spends back to do more development effort, right? So that is one where each company is incentivized to do more. Second is that there is a need for an upfront R&D fund where the government invests upfront in innovative intellectual property creation, and based on various milestones of that investigation, the government can release the funds, but we need to have commitment of large amounts of money to make sure that indigenization is evidenced and is created upfront, because most of the schemes give incentive after something has been developed, but this is an industry, in a critical industry, upfront capital availability is not very simple. And therefore, to incentivize it upfront and make sure that milestone-based gradation can be done to final delivery so that the cost is mitigated if at all there is a failure expected. But at the same time, we have committed people who are willing to create technology, get the resources where the technology can eventually get into the hands of manufacturers and producers like us and other people.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ankit Mehta. We were just talking about how the government really needs to step in now and incentivize indigenization and, of course, create an indigenous drone ecosystem that will ensure that the military gets drones with Indian-made components, and of course they're designed and developed in India as well. Thank you very much, Ankit, for joining us, Group Captain Narang and General Ravi Shankar. A new report from the Jamestown Foundation highlights the threat to undersea cables. It mentions Russian hybrid attacks targeting critical undersea infrastructure, particularly fiber optic cables. Now, these attacks have surged in the Baltic and Arctic since 2021. And these disruptions threaten essential communication channels and expose the vulnerabilities of Northern Europe's infrastructure. Should India be worried as well? India accesses the internet through undersea cables which lie on the seabed in the Indian Ocean. What if they are attacked by our adversaries? What happens to our internet? Joining me now to discuss this, Lieutenant Colonel Rajan Pavitran and Commander Arnab Das. Gentlemen, welcome to the News9 Plus show. Colonel Pavitran, how vulnerable is India to undersea cable disruption? There's a very elaborate report prepared by the Jamestown Foundation about these attacks that are actually happening right now in the Baltic. Russia and China are attacking these undersea cables. We are aware of the Chinese vessels, their survey vessels are very active in the Indian Ocean region around the spots where we have cables entering the Indian subcontinent. How vulnerable are we to undersea cable disruption?
Okay, for the undersea, I will leave it to Commander Arnab. But what I'll tell you is, India is uniquely vulnerable.
Yes.
Because we have transitioned to 100%, declared aim is to transition to 100% digital economy. Now, when you transition to 100% digital economy, constitutionally, our armed forces have to defend this economy, or we should prepare ourselves to defend this economy. Now, how do we defend this economy when all the root zone servers, 13 of them, 10 of them are in the US, two of them are in Europe, and one is in Japan. So if access to these root zone servers gets shut down, within about 7 days, our whole internet is supposed to go kaput. Okay. Now, to mitigate against this risk, both Russia initially and China, they've carried out multiple exercises, is what we have come to know, to see whether even if this gets cut, will the net stand up within India, within their own respective countries. Like, for example, your banking access, your whatever you're doing for your daily life.
Yes.
So they seem to be assured that that will happen. But in India, we have no mandate to localize data, and a lot of our services are we access it from abroad. So, in such a scenario, and I don't think we have carried out any military exercises as far as in the public domain is concerned. So, in such a scenario, we are at very high risk. How do we mitigate against this? Has the armed forces been given a direction? Has the industry been prepared for it? Have we carried out or have we done coordination with these other countries to learn how did they go about doing that? I have not heard of anything. So I feel that we are highly vulnerable.
We are highly vulnerable, and that's very worrisome, Colonel Pavitran. I mean, the fact that we could just literally have our internet shut off at the flick of a button and we know what to do about it. But Commander Das, I want to come to you now because you're an expert on underwater domain awareness. You're one of the few people who've been literally red flagging this issue of the fact that we have so little underwater domain awareness. This question of all of our undersea critical infrastructure, all of the cables that transport our internet that come from these underwater cables, how vulnerable are they really to external factors, saboteurs, given the number of Chinese survey vessels that are active in the Indian Ocean region, some of them even as we speak right now?
Yeah, as Pavitran sir mentioned, the criticality of this aspect doesn't need any discussion. I think we can leave it aside. But, you mentioned about the Baltic Sea, but, in 2023, Taiwan has had issues with 2 Chinese ships in the area cutting the only 2 submarine cables that supply internet.
Right.
Then I will not again talk about the Baltic Sea, but then in February 2024, the Houthis missile sank a British bulk carrier. This is another case where, some other activity is not deliberately to damage the internet cable, but damage to the internet cable will make us so much vulnerable is the question we all need to understand. So, to my understanding, an alternate to this, the NATO has come up with, this concept of hybrid space stroke submarine architecture ensuring information security of telecommunication. That is to switch between submarine cables and some other means. So NATO has developed, but as Pavitran sir said that to my understanding, there is nothing that, we have a mechanism or a framework to deal with such a situation.
Commander Das, my question is that Which agency in India is tasked with protecting all of this very critical undersea infrastructure, especially the submarine cables?
To my understanding, I don't see, because most of these infrastructure is with private entities. I mean, in India,
Right.
we are aware of three types of cables, right? I mean, between the mainland and Andamans and the other side,
Yes.
there's two Africa pearls, IX and IEX. These are the three cables that have been laid. But
Right.
these are, that with private entities. I mean, these are set up by private entities. To my knowledge, there is no declared agency which is responsible for this. I mean, other than the companies which are, which have laid it. But how much will they be able to? They are capable, or what kind of infrastructure or capabilities they have, will be something. And this is a very big geopolitical and geostrategic issue. I mean, the Chinese have developed. Even these private agencies who have laid the cables are heavily dependent on external agencies.
Right.
For laying, and even more important is the repair of, if there is a problem, the repair of these cables. And most of it is now led by Chinese, and even the Americans to some extent are relying, or to a large extent are relying on the Chinese. And being strategic in nature, if there is a real crunch situation, they can delay giving you this service. So
Right.
it's a very strategic aspect which one has to understand. Even the Americans have raised this concern. I mean,
Yes.
even in their strategic circles, and now the government has intervened to give more emphasis and give more incentives to develop indigenous capabilities even there. But in India, I don't think we have even looked at it very seriously.
We haven't looked at it very seriously, indeed, and it's very worrying to hear that from you, Commander Das. But Colonel Pavitran, what is it that we really need to do now to wake up the system, to be aware of a possibility of this nature, the fact that you could have a foreign ship or a saboteur coming and severing our internet capabilities, cables. We've seen attacks on the AIMS hospital in Delhi. There have been massive cyber attacks in the past where electricity grids have been shut down. Is there a possibility of this happening? And what should the government really do to prepare ourselves for this kind of an eventuality?
Okay, from a normal military perspective, although I'm not a naval expert, I know that the undersea cables which go along the high seas, all parts of it cannot be physically protected. So a prudent nation, like
Yes.
for example, NATO and the US, they have got their own root zone servers within their own geographical territory.
Right.
And they might be carrying out exercises, which we are not aware of. The Russia has already declared that they're carrying out exercises. China also is carried, it's rumored that they've carried out such exercises. As it is, most of the infrastructure stay on their own mainland.
Right.
We are the only nation who has taken a decision to transit to 100% digital economy. Now, when you take such a policy decision, it should also be accompanied by analyzing how do we militarily defend this domain. But repeatedly, it is seen that we take these policy decisions without looking for militarily, defending that domain. And that leads us into huge vulnerabilities. So ideally, we should, since if the root zone servers, we should ask the Americans, can you relocate one to India, since we are a strategic partner, and
Right.
we have taken so many steps to ensure our data, etc. And
Yes.
this vulnerability which should be flagged. I think it was, which for reasons best known, has never happened. But if that is not so, shouldn't we be independently taking the steps what Russians, etc., have tried to take? Localize our data, try and see if all our servers will be up and running, even if 100% the internet is cut off from the
Yes.
rest of the globe, etc. These are normal things which a nation should plan for and
Right.
should do.
So, Colonel Pavitran, sorry to interrupt you, but what is a root zone server? Could you explain to our viewers why it's so critical for the safe running of the internet?
Okay, in the internet, there is a hierarchy of servers which control the whole thing. Okay, when the internet was initially created, the root zone servers, or for the short, they call it root servers. There are 13 of them, numbering from alpha to Mike. Yeah, I think it's Mike. So 10 of them, because the internet is a US invention, is located on the US mainland. Okay, and 3 of them, 2 of them in Europe, and one is in Japan. So initially, the Americans, when they created this, they have strategically kept, arm's length control. And when Snowden happened, they declared that this will be a controlled by a multi-stakeholder model, where an organization called ICANN, it will not be under the US, it will be by NGOs and, different organizations from all over the globe.
Right. Sorry to interrupt you again, but Snowden is the Edward Snowden, the CIA contractor who exposed the fact that the US was snooping on a lot of the internet communication, global internet communication.
Yes, absolutely. That what we thought was a shared commons is not a commons, was unequivocally proved by Snowden.
It is an uncommon, yes.
It's a controlled domain. It's a lake. If from an ocean perspective, it has become a lake of one particular country.
Right.
But in spite of all these evidences, we continue to do what we do, basically because we have, feel that there is a ITES industry which we cannot afford to lose, which I have predicted with the coming of AI, this is bound to come, fail. Okay. Today, without any knowledge of coding, people like me can, easily create code. I feel that it is going to, unless for very specialized code, it is going to get automated, and that ITES industry is going to come to an end. It's a very, it's a logical prediction to make.
Right.
Then where does that leave us? Why have we not taken those precautions as a nation? Can you just sacrifice the rest of the nation because there is an ITES industry which is at stake? These are questions which ordinary Indians should ask the government of the day.
These are very important questions, and you're one of the few people who've been raising these questions repeatedly, Colonel Pavitran. That's why I keep coming back to you. But Commander Das, again, now, as Colonel Pavitran mentioned, there is a need to at least locate one of these root zone servers on Indian soil to ensure that we are not completely cut off from the internet. What are the other precautions that we must take to ensure that we don't get a wake-up call like we have in other domains, especially in this very critical domain of underwater domain awareness?
I mean, see, protection is one aspect. I mean, if you just look at, I would divide it into two parts. One is, being a player and, having certain strategic advantage. Like if you see today, 98% of the world's undersea cables are manufactured and installed by just 4 private firms.
Right.
One US subcom is one US company, French firm Alcatel Submarine Networks, then Japanese Nippon Electric Company, and the 4th one is the Chinese. And that 87 is first 3, and the Chinese Huawei Marine Networks is controlling 11%. But the Chinese are getting more and more because in Africa and many such global south, China is rapidly gaining, entry. So this is one part, but the problem is when you have a disruption, how do you react to that disruption? I mean, what Pavitran sir is saying that if something happens, it's a kind of a redundancy that you are building in, and you have something. But if something happens, most of the repair facilities are owned by, what I mentioned earlier, is owned by the Chinese. So they may delay providing, even if it's a private company, and most of the private companies are now controlled by the government. So they may even delay providing you that service, and internet disruption for a while, even a couple of days can create havoc. I mean, as sir said repeatedly that we are completely now getting into the digital world, and this will also raise questions in terms of how much can we believe in this, and this transition will get disrupted if we don't have 100% confidence.
Right. Absolutely.
So that would be something very, very worrying. And also what happens is now, if we say under the Sagar vision, security and growth for all in the region, we have significant problems with our neighbors.
Right. We could have significant problems with our neighbors.
Will they trust us to, be a provider for security for internet? This undersea cable protection is also an important thing. Will our neighbors even trust, or will they allow the Chinese to enter into our neighborhood?
Absolutely.
Is something we need to look at very seriously.
A very, very fascinating aspect of this. But Commander Das, I want to go to Colonel Pavitran now. You mentioned a while earlier, Colonel Pavitran, the fact that the Russians have been exercising, and there are a number of these exercises in the last couple of years. 2021, there was one as recent as 2024 where they practiced disconnecting themselves from the internet. Can you give us an idea of how this actually played out? What are the lessons that the Russians would have learned from this? Because the reports obviously would not be released, but what does an exercise like this, really tell you? Why do we need to do something similar, you think?
Okay, so details of these exercises are limited, but what has happened is Russia viewed the internet like India did as a normal domain. But once the color revolution started, President Putin understood that this is a domain which needs to be controlled. And he then immediately gave those orders, and to say that we need to prepare for a day if the internet is interrupted. And the Russians seem to have created certain appliances which they have embedded into their net, where they say can resolve all their, websites, even if it is cut off. It can, ensure that the Russian internet stays up. So when I had a chance to interact with ICANN, I had asked them, so supposing Indian internet access to the ICANN root servers, because we have also got thousands of instances of these root zone servers in India, but supposing this particular access is cut off, how long will the Indian internet, stay up? So they have told me that it is expected that it should stay up for around 7 days, after which it will start dissipating if you don't get the control back up.
Right.
Okay. So there are two aspects to this. One is, we see as a military man, we always have to anticipate everything. Supposing the root zone server, whoever controls the root zone server, decides to itself kick us out, then we have to, that is one which Putin is always, that's why he is doing the exercises which he is doing.
Right.
The others, if it gets, cut off in the undersea cable. So both as a nation, it's who will plan for our defense. We have to plan for it. And this is scenarios which we need to war game, and we need to come up with solutions.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, why are we transiting into a 100% digital economy where, the whole nation will come to a standstill because
where
of other people?
You've handed over your vulnerability to another nation or a group of other nations. But thank you very much, Colonel Pavitran, Commander Arnab Das, for highlighting these vulnerabilities in the light of this new report on the fact that several countries of the world are worried about undersea cable disruption. Thank you very much for joining us. Military historian Air Marshal Arjun Subramaniam has chronicled India's wars since 1947. In fact, he's an authority on all of India's wars since independence. His recent book, however, is a departure from military history. It's a biography of former Northern Army Commander Lieutenant General Rustam Nanavati. The book is called Shooting Straight, and Air Marshal Subramaniam just joins me on the show right now. Air Marshal Subramaniam, welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you very much for having me, Sandeep. Always a pleasure to chat with you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you as well. Why a biography on Lieutenant General Nanavati?
That's an interesting question. And a lot of people have asked me that because, that truly is intriguing. To my mind, that is intriguing, and that was a challenge. So look, Sandeep, for the last few years, it's not that I've put aside my air power hat, but I have predominantly worn a military historian's hat. And after finishing India's Wars 1 and 2, I was looking for a vacant space to occupy and a fresh idea. And that's when I realized that military biographies have been very rare over the last decade or so, and particularly so from the generation of officers who were commissioned after 1947.
Yes.
And that's when I started looking around saying that, look, why can't we have the military biography of an accomplished and outstanding military commander? Why only politicians, diplomats, bureaucrats, scientists, film stars, sportsmen? Why not any military leader? And what made it easier for me to zero in on General Nanavati was that General Nanavati spent a lot of time talking to me during the writing of my second book, which was Full Spectrum, that looked at conflict from 72 to 2020, that coincided with large portions of his own career. And when I put everything together with his meticulously maintained records, his photographic memory, and his excellent articulation in long interviews, I said I have a perfect narrative for a biography. And I think that challenged the storyteller in me.
Challenge the storyteller in you, and Air Marshal Subramaniam, you're an excellent storyteller, I must say. I'm a big fan of your books. But tell us how relevant General Nanavati's strategic vision is today, given the evolving threats from China along the LAC and this continued Pakistan-sponsored militancy in J&K?
Okay, so there are three strands to my book. The three strands to my book are as relevant today as they were 20 years ago when he retired. And the three strands are soldiering, leadership, and strategy. And since you particularly asked me about strategy, I will concentrate on that over the next minute or two. So, a number of General Nanavati was not a strategist, but he possessed a keen strategic mindset. And that is why, when he was Corps Commander of 3 Corps in the Northeast, that was a time when the Naga ceasefire was holding, but rather tenuously. And that was when the embers of the Manipur conflict were becoming more and more difficult to handle. And he predicted in 1998 to the then Home Minister that if you don't pay attention to Manipur, Manipur is quickly going to go out of control and become a greater problem for the Indian state to negotiate as compared to the Naga problem. And I think his prediction was quite prescient. Let's move on to J&K. So General Nanavati served in J&K during two tumultuous periods. The first one was when the insurgency or the covert war in J&K was transiting from a Kashmiri trained militant flavor to a Pakistani militant trained flavor, wherein the Lashkar and the Jaish started ruling the roost. And that was the time when General Nanavati was a hawk in his approach towards managing matters in Jammu and Kashmir, looking at crushing the terrorist movement. Fast forward 10 years later, he came back as the army commander. And now he came back more as a realist, in which he said that apart from waging a relentless covert war against Pakistan, one also has to chart out a roadmap for peace. And in 2002, at the height of Op Parakram, he crafted a strategy which is called the Strategy for the Resolution of Conflict in J&K, strands of which you will read in the book. And unfortunately for him, the political establishment, except for Mr. Jaswant Singh and N.N. Vora to some extent, none of them really looked at that strategy very carefully. However, some of his successors in Northern Command argue that that was the best strategy document that they have ever seen for the resolution of conflict in J&K.
Right. And, Air Marshal Subramaniam, you mentioned how far-sighted he was, General Nanavati, but the fact is that he was also someone who mentioned that the removal of Article 370 was very essential for restoring peace in Jammu and Kashmir, but that was also contingent on good administration. Do you believe we are closer to realizing his vision of J&K minus Article 370?
I think so. In a recent discussion that we had at the, during one of the book launches, he did mention this again. He said, look, when a government executes a far-reaching move such as this and suggests that there may be a way forward and a way to restore normalcy in terms of statehood and things like that, I think what he suggested is that we cannot afford to stop this process halfway. We need to go whole hog, and we need to let the people know that we are serious about living up to whatever we have promised.
Living up to whatever we've promised, indeed. And that was Air Marshal Arjun Subramaniam. Thank you very much for joining us, Air Marshal Subramaniam. Wish your book many sales. You can read more about this in the biography of Lieutenant General Nanavati, out in the bookstores now. It's called Shooting Straight. It's authored by Air Marshal.